Hello, everyone. Welcome back to my podcast. This is episode 3, which means that we are on session 3 of the Law of One. This session was recorded on January 21st, 1981, and we are just going to hop right in and see what Ra has to say. So Ra starts with their greeting. I am Ra. I greet you in the love and the light of the one infinite creator. I communicate with you now. Then Dawn asks, my first question is, did we correctly perform the ritual for starting the communication? And as we know from the end of the last session, Ra gave them a not elaborate, but specific ritual to prepare Carla for her trance state and to prepare everybody who is participating for the contact to begin, to sort of orient their mind complex to be ready to do this magical work. And so this is the first time that Carla has actually gone fully into trance with all the accoutrements and the full ritual that Ra gave. So Dawn's asking, of course, did we do this right? And Ra says, I am Ra. The placement of the artifacts designed to balance the instrument should be placed at the instrument's head for the least distortion of effect. The remainder of the beginning account of purpose is quite acceptable for those speaking desire to serve. Otherwise, the attendant emphasis in mind complexities would not have been effected properly. We caution you to guard against those who are not wishing to serve others above all else from taking part in the beginning or in lending their distortions of mind-body-spirit complex to any session, as we should then be unable to properly blend our distortions with those of this instrument. So, basically what Ra says is, you basically did it right, but even more important than performing these steps in the proper way, in the proper order, is making sure that your mind complex is oriented towards the desire to serve others above all else, because that's the most important thing about maintaining the contact with Ra and blending with the instrument's vibrations. And they say that if anyone else is to participate in these sessions, that you need to make sure that they are also aware that they need to be consciously distorted towards service to others as the contact begins. Because if they're not, it would actually affect Carla, and it would make it so Carla wasn't able to receive Ra. So, Dawn asks, should I move the Bible, candle, and incense at this time? And Ra says, I am Ra, this would be appropriate. So, Dawn moves the items, and then 3.3, Dawn asks, is this the proper position? And Ra says, I am Ra. Please correct the angle of the incense so that it is perpendicular to the plane of 20 degrees north by northeast. And in the last session, Ra mentioned making sure Carla's head was oriented 20 degrees north by northeast, as that is a direction where the most purified energies of the quote-unquote New Age are coming in. Ra talks about this a little bit more later as well, when they're talking about how to orient a pyramid on the directional axis of our planet. But the incense needed to be at that orientation, and so Dawn fixes it and asks, is this satisfactory? And Ra says, please check your eye to make fine correction. We will explain the process by which this becomes a significant distortion balancer. The incense acts as energizer to the physical body of this instrument, signifying its humanity. This is, therefore, a necessity that the wafted smoke is perceived from the same relative angle as the instrument perceives the opened Bible, balanced by the lighted candle, signify love, light, and light, love, and, therefore, give the mental and emotional, shall we call it, distortion complex of this instrument, the sight of paradise and peace which it seeks. Thus energized from the lower to the higher, the instrument becomes balanced and does not grow fatigued. We appreciate your concern, for this will enable our teach learning to proceed more easily. So essentially, they're speaking of the importance of the incense as a factor in this ritual. And basically what they're saying is that in our language, in the way we talk about spiritual things as humans and not necessarily Ra, the incense is very grounding. The incense reminds Carla of her physical body as she's leaving her physical body, and presumably when she returns to her physical body. And maybe does something for her body while her consciousness is gone from her physical body. So the incense acts as an energizer to her physical body. It helps maintain that connection to her physical self, which is very important as she's doing this magical work. So Dawn asks, does it appear correctly aligned now? And Ra says, I judge it within limits of acceptability. So 3.6, Dawn asks, at the last session, we had 2 questions we were saving for this session. One having to do with the possible capstone of the Great Pyramid at Giza, the other something inaudible Dawn says about the heavy blocks. I know these questions are of no importance at all with respect to the Law of One, but it was my judgment, which you may correct, that this would provide an easy entry for the reader of the material. We are very grateful for your contact and will certainly take suggestions about how we should proceed with this. This is just one guess. And so Ra responds and says, I am Ra. I will not suggest the proper series of questions. This is your prerogative as a free agent of the Law of One, having understood that our social memory complex cannot effectively discern the distortions of the societal mind-body-spirit complex of your peoples. We wish now to fulfill our teach learning honor responsibility by answering what is asked. This only will suffice, for we cannot plumb the depths of the distortion complexes which infect your peoples. The first question, therefore, is the capstone. We iterate the unimportance of this type of data. The so-called Great Pyramid had 2 capstones. One was of our design and was of smaller and carefully contrived pieces of the material upon your planet, which you call granite. This was contrived for crystalline properties and for the proper flow of your atmosphere via a type of what you would call chimney. At a time when we as a people had left your density, the original was taken away and a more precious one substituted. It consisted in part of a golden material. This did not change the properties of the pyramid, as you call it, at all, and was a distortion due to the desire of a few to mandate the use of the structure as a royal place only. Do you wish to query further upon this first question? So here we have Ra saying, we can't direct you. We can make heavy-handed suggestions, which they do. But at the same time, they're very aware of what is going on in Dawn's mind as they're responding and making these suggestions. And they can see the limits of when they might say something that would infringe upon Dawn's free will and when they are going to say something that won't infringe upon Dawn's free will about what he has already conceptualized about what is going on. And Ross says what I think is very funny, we cannot plumb the depths of the distortion complexes which infect your peoples. I think that's a very funny way of saying that we do not understand humans. If you, as the person we have chosen to speak with, thinks that this is the proper question to ask, the proper way for other people to get into this material, we will just take your word for it because we don't really know. But it is unimportant. This type of information is just not really what we really want to be talking about. So maybe try to remember that. And the thing is, later they do say they do want to talk about the pyramids, and they do talk a lot about specific things about the pyramids, but this question about the capstone of the pyramid is really unimportant. But of course, our peoples, I think, find it pretty interesting that the top was taken away and replaced once the pyramids were sort of taken over by the elite, the royalty, for their use only. They tried to make it fancier, and this didn't actually do anything other than make it look fancier. It didn't change any of the properties. Another thing I think is really interesting is how they talk about how they built the chimneys in the pyramid. I think archaeologists have always wondered what the various, I don't have another word for chimney other than chimney, what the various chimneys were for in the pyramid. And Ross says, that they were really just there to bring in fresh air without a draft. So that when you were inside the pyramid, when you were either being initiated inside the pyramid or as an initiate healing somebody else inside of the pyramid, the air in the pyramid wasn't stagnant, wasn't, if you were just in this giant granite building without any sort of airflow, it would be very stagnant and stale, the air would be. But the way that they built the chimneys allowed airflow without a draft so that the air remained fresh, breathable, and wasn't a distortion of the mind and causing discomfort in the process of initiation and or healing. So then we go to question 3.7. Dawn asks, what did you mean by chimney? What was its specific purpose? Ross says there is a proper flow of your atmosphere, which, though small, freshens the whole of the structure. This was designed by having airflow ducts, as this instrument might call them, situated so that there is a freshness of atmosphere without any disturbance or draft. So question 3.8 is, how were the blocks moved? And Ra says, I am Ra. You must picture the activity within all that is created. The energy is, though finite, quite large compared to the understanding/distortion of your peoples. This is an obvious point, well known to your peoples, but little considered. This energy is intelligent. It is hierarchical. Much as your mind-body-spirit complex dwells within a hierarchy of vehicles and retains, therefore, the shell or shape or field and the intelligence of each ascendingly intelligent or balanced body, so does each atom of such a material as rock. When one can speak to that intelligence, the finite energy of the physical or chemical rock/body is put into contact with that infinite power which is resident in the more well-tuned bodies, be they human or rock. With this connection made, a request may be given. The intelligence of infinite rockness communicates to its physical vehicle, and that splitting and moving which is desired is then carried out through the displacement of the energy field of rockness from finity to a dimension which we may conveniently call simply infinity. In this way, that which is required is accomplished due to the cooperation of the infinite understanding of the Creator indwelling in the living rock. This is, of course, the mechanism by which many things are accomplished which are not subject to your present means of physical analysis of action at a distance. So this is a pretty big answer from Ra. Basically, they're saying that all of creation is hierarchical in the way that, and they talk about this later, for instance, the human body. The human body, our first density parts are all of the materials that make up our body. Just the physical matter that makes up our body is the first density vehicle. The second density vehicle is the animal self, the actual physical body that is a living, breathing, active, reactive part of the creation. The third density vehicle is the density where we begin to gain consciousness, but also we are veiled. So the third density self is the most distorted version because we have the confusion where we aren't allowing this hierarchy of bodies to just be. All of our confused thoughts are creating distortions in the third density level of our physical vehicle. And then we have the fourth density vehicle, the fifth density vehicle, the sixth density vehicle, and they all have a higher awareness and understanding and get closer and closer to infinity. So the rocks, they are technically first density, but they have these other vehicles in potentiation that aren't necessarily visible to us, but they do exist. And so the closer that a third density being is to their own infinite self, the more they're able to communicate to the infinite self of the rock. And so Ra, being sixth density, obviously was able to communicate to the infinite level of the rock and manipulate its form from that level. So yeah, Ra says that this is essentially how all action at a distance occurs, is this communication to the higher non-physical vehicle that exists alongside the physical being, the physical identity of any being or object. And that connection through intelligent infinity, we're able to then change the shape, change the location, do all that kind of stuff. Obviously, we're going to talk about that more. It takes a very purified consciousness to be able to do something like that. But for Ra, it was very easy because they are very purified consciousness. Not totally purified, obviously, but they're far beyond where we are as far as their awareness of infinity. So, question 3.9. Don says, I am reminded of the statement, approximately. If you had enough faith, you could say to a mountain to move and the mountain would move. I assume this is approximately what you are saying, and I am assuming that if you are fully aware of the law of one, then you are able to do these things. Is this correct? And Ra says, I am Ra. The vibratory distortion of sound, faith, is perhaps one of the stumbling blocks between those of what we may call the infinite path and those of the finite proving/understanding. You are precisely correct in your understanding of the congruency of faith and intelligent infinity. However, one is a spiritual term, the other more acceptable perhaps to the conceptual framework distortions of those who seek with measure and pen. So, I've always found this quote very, very interesting. Ross says that the vibratory distortion of sound faith has a lot of baggage attached to it, let's say, in our current spiritual religious understanding collectively. And Ross says that most people want proof. They want to see something happen so that they can understand and accept what has happened. However, the word faith to them is congruent to the word intelligent infinity. They prefer to use the word intelligent infinity because they see the distortions in the word faith, and the concept of intelligent infinity is a little more descriptive and less of an ask. Whereas with faith, you have to just kind of, being told to take things on faith has been a way of controlling and manipulating people, essentially, for a long time. So they wanted a different word. They used the word intelligent infinity, that is the infinite nature of reality and how it responds to consciousness, essentially. So, but they say that these words are congruent, intelligent infinity and faith. They're basically the same thing. So, when you think about reaching that state of accessing intelligent infinity, it does require a large amount of what we call faith and being able to surrender the need of proving or understanding something and just being aware that all is possible. And the more we are aware of that, the more we can work within those infinite possibilities of creating the reality around us. So, question 310 is, then if an individual is totally informed with respect to the law of one and lives and is the law of one, such things as the building of a pyramid by direct mental effort would be commonplace. Is that what I am to understand? Am I correct? I am Ra. You are incorrect in that there is a distinction between the individual power through the law of one and the combined or societal memory complex mind-body-spirit understanding of the law of one. In the first case, only the one individual, purified of all flaws, could move a mountain. In the case of mass understanding of unity, each individual may contain an acceptable amount of distortion, and yet the mass mind could move mountains. The progress is normally from the understanding which you now seek to a dimension of understanding which is governed by the laws of love and which seeks the laws of light. Those who are vibrating with the law of light seek the law of one. Those who vibrate with the law of one seek the law of foreverness. We cannot say what is beyond this dissolution of the unified self with all that there is, for we still seek to become all that there is, and still are we Ra. Thus, our paths go onward. So essentially, what Ra is saying here is that, sure, an individual who's completely purified of flaws could do these things, but it's actually easier to just use the collective power of many individuals who don't have to be fully purified, but at least unified in their understanding of unity and infinity and the awareness of these things being possible. Then the group is able to do these types of things, to move mountains, to create whatever the group desires for itself. So I think this is a really important introduction to the power of the social memory complex and why it's so important for humans at this time to try to reach for that state of being, that collective social memory, because then as long as our will is united, we can create the world that we want to have. Whereas right now we do have a lot of individuals who have a lot of power, who are able to metaphorically move mountains in ways that are harmful to the collective. But if the collective were to unify and recognize our collective power and have a shared will, we could do that. We could combine all of our power together, all of our little pieces of power together. And here Ra says, the progress is normally from the understanding which you now seek to a dimension of understanding which is governed by the laws of love and which seeks the laws of light. So what they're saying is that we're in third density, we're trying to reach fourth density, which is where we have the social memory complex. So we're seeking the dimension of understanding governed by the laws of love, and then fourth density seeks the laws of light. So that's where we are in our progress. We're reaching there. We're going to get there. And then Ra says that after the law of light, those who are vibrating with the law of light seek the law of one. Those who vibrate with the law of one seek the law of foreverness. Ra's at the portion of that process where they're vibrating with the law of one and they seek the law of foreverness. And they're trying to dissolve themselves into the unified self so that they become all that there is. But they haven't done that yet. They're still in sixth density. That happens in seventh density. So they're still moving forward just as we're moving forward. Question 3.11 is, was the pyramid then built by the mutual action of many of your people? And Ra says, I am Ra. The pyramids which we thought/built were constructed from thought forms created by our social memory complex. So this is funny to me. I find it amazing. Dawn asks a question, were these built by the mutual action of many of your people? And Ra's like, we don't identify with the term people, and we don't identify with the concept of action. These were constructed from thought forms that were created by our social memory complex. So Ra just wants to be very precise with the language, and their identity is a social memory complex, not of just many of your people, which I think many of your people implies a portion of the social memory complex, whereas Ra is saying, no, we are one unified being as a social memory complex. Question 3.12 is, then the rock was created by thought in place rather than moved from somewhere else. Is that correct? And Ra says, I am Ra. We built with everlasting rock, the Great Pyramid, as you call it. Other of the pyramids were built with stone and moved from one place to another. So they talk about this later. Ra, built the Great Pyramid to coincide with the birth of a great architect. And so I'm pretty sure that basically means it was essentially the Egyptians went to sleep one night and then they woke up the next day and there was a giant pyramid waiting for them that Ra thought into existence. They just thought and built it. But the following pyramids then were built by moving the rock. I'm going to take a leap here and guess that once Ra revealed themselves as having been the ones who built the pyramid, they were then trying to teach and show the Egyptians how this is done by thought, how you can just move this material by thought and not, by action, as Ra corrects earlier. So Dawn asks, 3:13, what is everlasting rock? And Ra says, I am Ra. If you can understand the concept of thought forms, you will realize that the thought form is more regular in its distortion than the energy fields created by the materials in the rock, which has been created through thought form, from thought to infinite energy and beingness in your, shall we say, distorted reflection of the level of the thought form. May we answer you in any more helpful way. So essentially they're saying that the everlasting rock, I'm guessing that's kind of a literal term, essentially, that the rock, whereas most granite would degrade with weather over time, that this was made to be a permanent structure with a little bit more of a magical field of energy protecting it, whereas the other pyramids weren't. So then Dawn follows up with, this is slightly trivial, but I was wondering why, in that case, the pyramid was made of many blocks, rather than the whole thing being created at once. So Ra says, I am Ra. There is a law which we believe to be one of the more significant primal distortions of the law of one. That is the law of confusion. You have called this the law of free will. We wish to make a healing machine, or a time-space ratio complex, which was as efficacious as possible. However, we did not desire to allow the mystery to be penetrated by the peoples in such a way that we became worshipped as builders of a miraculous pyramid. Thus it appears to be made, not thought. So, again, with my theory that Ra did build this overnight, and the Egyptians who lived there saw this sort of miracle happen, they were much more open to this miracle happening. But I believe Ra knew that since they were making a permanent structure, that in the future more people might see this structure. It allowed a lot more mystery for it to look as if it had been built instead of just magically created by the thoughts of a much, much, much more advanced race of beings. So that is how they protected the free will of humans, by making it still look created and not magical. Making it look much more mundane than it actually is. So in 3:15, Dawn asks, well, then you speak of the pyramid, especially the Great Pyramid, I assume, as primarily a healing machine, and also spoke of it as a device for initiation. Are these one and the same concepts? And Ra says, they are part of one complex of love-light, intent/sharing. To use the healing aspects properly, it was important to have a purified and dedicated channel or energizer for the love light of the infinite creator to flow through. Thus, the initiatory method was necessary to prepare the mind, the body, and the spirit for service in the creator's work. The two are integral. So, this is a bit of a tricky thing to untangle. Being initiated isn't precisely the same as being healed, but in the way that an initiation removes distortions and healing removes distortions, they are one and the same. And there needed to be an initiated healer to do the healing. So both things happened inside of the chamber of the pyramid, but they aren't exactly the same thing, but they're sort of the same thing. Because, initiation is about releasing certain distortions and allowing those to fall away, but it's on a level beyond being healed. Usually someone who is being initiated isn't also dealing with major bodily distortions, unless that is a part of their initiation, and that does happen. But when you're on that level of actually being a healer, like the first person that you heal is yourself, right? So you've already begun to do the work of untangling the mind, body, spirit distortions that would cause so many distortions and blockages that you are ill. And so the initiation was a different step. We'll talk about this in the next question, which I guess I'll just move on to that. So 3:16, Dawn says, does the shape of the pyramid itself, is that a key function in the initiation process? And Ra says, this is a large question. We feel that we shall begin and ask you to reevaluate and ask further at a later session this somewhat, shall we say, informative point. To begin, there are two main functions of the pyramid in relation to the initiatory procedures. One has to do with the body. Before the body can be initiated, the mind must be initiated. This is the point at which most adepts of your present cycle find their mind-body-spirit complexes distorted from. When the character and personality that is the true identity of the mind has been discovered, the body then must be known in each and every way. Thus, the various functions of the body need understanding and control with detachment. The first use of the pyramid, then, is the going down into the pyramid for the purposes of deprivation of sensory input, so that the body may, in a sense, be dead and another life begin. We advise at this time any necessary questions and a fairly rapid ending of this session. Have you any queries of the space-time? So, a portion of this that I think about often and I find interesting is that adepts have initiated their mind. And right now, at this point in our cycle, most adepts, those who are starting to work with intelligent infinity, must initiate the body. And that's where that's a very long process. It takes a long time to actually initiate the body and to begin to work with the body. And I think that is where initiates begin to understand the distortions of the body and how to alleviate and ameliorate the distortions of the body. So the pyramid creates an initiation of the body where the mind is sort of tricked into this death state, where it's a symbolic death state. It's a very powerful frame of mind to be in this sensory deprivation state and to feel like all of, your senses have been removed from you, so that when you come back out of that, you sort of have a new perspective. In a way, it's like people who have NDEs. When they come back, they sort of have this fresh look at life from a different perspective than they had before this major event where they came so close to losing their life. So it's symbolic, but it also can trick our veiled mind-body spirit complex into this rebirth of sorts. So that was one way that the pyramids initiated the healers, was by giving them this pseudo NDE rebirth in symbolic form. So, but again, here Ra is saying that initiates would have had to do the work of already balancing the mind in a very thorough way, to where they understand their own mind well enough that this symbolic event could be consciously controlled in the mind, and so that it could be used in that symbolic fashion. Because once you have initiated your mind, once you've learned how your mind works and released a lot of the conflicting ideas that keep the mind from working at its highest potentials, then you're ready to initiate the body. And this was, I think, a way of initiating the body that was sped up, on a sped up timeline. Whereas, anyone can initiate the body without a pyramid, without a sensory deprivation experience, without an NDE. It just takes a little longer than something so dramatic. So, we are starting to wrap it up. Dawn asks, the only question is there anything that we have done wrong, or anything that we could do to make the instrument more comfortable? And Ra says, we scan this instrument. This instrument has been much aided by these precautions. We suggest only some attention to the neck, which seems in this body distortion to be distorted in the area of strength weakness. More support, therefore, to the neck area may be an aid. And Dawn asks then for his final question, should we have her drink the water from the chalice behind her head after we charge it, or should we use a different glass of water? And Ra says, that and only that chalice shall be the most beneficial, as the virgin material living in the chalice accepts, retains, and responds to the love vibration activated by your beingness. I am Ra. I will now leave this group rejoicing in the power and the peace of the one Creator, Adonai. So, yeah, these are just instrument maintenance questions. Ra says that rubbing Carla's neck will be helpful when she comes back out of trance, because she's very weak in that area. And then Dawn asks if the chalice of water that Jim and him have blessed, if she should drink the water from the chalice, or if they should put that water in a different vessel for her to drink from. And Ra says the virgin chalice is what she should be drinking from. And by virgin chalice, they mean previously unused for any other purpose. This chalice that they used actually came as a Christmas gift from Dawn's aunt the previous Christmas. The Ra contact started about halfway through January, so at the end of December, they'd gotten this silver chalice as a gift, which is a pretty interesting coincidence and synchronicity. So it hadn't been used before, so it had only been used for this ritual, and that gave it a lot more power, essentially. The purity of that gave it more power. And so, yeah, that was session 3. If anyone ever has any questions about anything specifically, about something that I might have missed, please feel free to leave the questions in the comments or message me, or however you want to reach out. In the comments is always good, because then other people can see and learn from it. Most of this stuff that I comment on is because I've seen people asking questions about these things, and I've had to think of answers about them before. So some of the things that I might not have commented on maybe I just haven't thought about them before, so I really enjoy getting questions because it helps me learn as well, because I just hadn't thought about that. So yeah, if you ever have any questions, feel free to reach out in whatever way you're comfortable with. And that's it for this session. So thank you so much for listening. I hope it was helpful and informative and inspiring, ideally. And I hope that you feel more confident in your seeking going forward. And one more thing I would like to add is that if you have any feedback about this podcast, about anything in regards to the podcast, I'm very new at this, so any supportive or critical feedback will help me learn how to do this better and offer a better learning aid. So feel free to share that as well. And I thank you in advance for doing so.